In 2010, a Thursday night sitcom on NBC premiered an episode that would completely redefine how I saw the half-hour comedy. It abandoned its standard visual style and narrative structure in favor of something more experimental, something that managed to innovate within the medium while paying homage to its past. It combined sharp writing with just a bit of sentimentality, and balanced direct references with enough creative contributions to stand on its own as something new entirely. This ambitious experiment was an objective success, and was even popular enough to get a sequel episode the following season. I'm talking, of course, about the live episodes of 30 Rock. By the time Community was making Dan Harmon a cluttered household name, 30 Rock had already established itself as a genre-savvy comedy seemingly adored by critics and ignored by audiences. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, I just have one of those voices, but I actually watched both of these shows as they were airing. Of course, in 2010 I was 14, so my viewing tastes were deemed irrelevant. I think what drew me to both of these shows, even if I didn't know it at the time, was this idea that with limited commercial power came limited responsibility. There was still some network interference, but with less oversight came the relative freedom to pursue just about any idea they wanted to explore. And in the case of 30 Rock, some of the best of those ideas just so happen to be about television itself. 30 Rock was inspired by creator and star Tina Fey's time as head writer on Saturday Night Live. The show debuted in the fall of 2006, following Liz Lemon as she dealt with the day-to-day antics of her weekly sketch show, TGS with Tracy Jordan. Despite the show's premise and all of Fey's late-night experience, 30 Rock wasn't content with solely skewering sketch comedy. Instead, the fictitious TGS served as a convenient backdrop for a wide range of characters, both behind the scenes and in front of the camera, with the show's location at the titular 30 Rockefeller Plaza providing a unique opportunity to consistently poke fun at parent network NBC, along with all sorts of TV shows both real and fictional. In its first 4 seasons, the show took aim at a wide range of television-based targets, from corporate green initiatives
Al Gore?
to corporate greed initiatives.
When did I shoot these things?
That's the beauty of this, Jerry. It's all done with computers. When you see it, you're going to love it.
25 sexy moms, 50 sweaty 8th grade boys, and one beloved American comedy star.
This Wednesday on MILF Island.
There was even a season 3 episode entitled The One with the Cast of Night Court that reunited the cast of this long-cancelled series for an illegitimate revival. This episode aired in 2008. A full 15 years before NBC reunited the cast of this now even longer cancelled series for a legitimate revival. I just think that's neat. Speaking of, over the course of its 7-season run, 30 Rock was likened more than once to a live-action counterpart to The Simpsons, not just in terms of predicting the future, but with its layered, rapid-fire joke structure that combined blink-and-you'll-miss-it sight gags, physical humor, and razor-sharp dialogue. Since it was a single-camera comedy without a studio audience, 30 Rock left itself enough breathing room to occasionally experiment with that formula without a rigidly constructed status quo to adhere to. And early in its 5th season, the show would redefine what the half-hour comedy was capable of once and for all by adding a studio audience. Of course, there was one more, much more important change. This episode would be broadcast live, with 2 separate tapings, one for the East Coast and one for the West Coast. What could have been a snake eating its own tail of a television event instead cemented its status as a classic episode of an already well-regarded series. Season 5, Episode 4, the appropriately titled Live Show, was broadcast live from 30 Rockefeller Plaza on October 14th, 2010. In addition to all the live components, shooting on location at 30 Rock was another adjustment for the series, who despite its title largely filmed out of a studio in Queens. I think that in less capable hands, this could have made for a half-baked final product, landing somewhere on the spectrum of awkward and watered down to live for TV musical levels of uncomfortable. With a script by Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, and veteran director Beth McCarthy-Miller at the helm, Live Show instead rises to the occasion with a series of adjustments that highlight the live setting so often and so well that it doesn't feel too constricted by the limitations of the format. I don't think every choice works from a strictly comedic standpoint, but I think they're all interesting and worth talking about if nothing else. The concept of Live Show is that it's taking place in real time behind the scenes of a live taping of TGS. This is a good example of a necessary contrivance that I think really works in the show's favor. A typical episode of 30 Rock might take place over the course of a week, or at least a few days, And while this pacing allows for plots to naturally develop and escalate, for a live show it could also necessitate multiple costume and set changes for the cast and crew. But by condensing the time frame to match the length of a TGS taping, it's suddenly not just convenient, but outright necessary for all the main characters to be in one location for an entire episode. And I think there's some added authenticity and charm on display when they lean into the setting, like having Jenna casually being put into a costume while having a conversation with Liz, or the occasional background shot of someone wearing a TGS crew shirt, who could be real crew members for all I know, which really isn't much. Since the show only has 30 minutes in our universe and theirs to tell an entire story, the plot would have to be compelling enough to justify the episode's existence, while also having low enough stakes to be neatly wrapped up in its truncated time frame. In what I believe to be a nod to this bygone era of classic sitcoms, Live Show's story would be equally old-fashioned, and also happens to be among my all-time favorite sitcom tropes. It's the main character's birthday, but no one remembers until it's too late. Specifically, it's Liz Lemon's 40th birthday, a milestone that the show has been building towards that is now elevated by the show's runtime acting as a ticking clock to the end of her big day. The episode kicks off with a familiar and easy-to-stage cold open with Liz meeting Jack in his office at NBC. The first thing that's noticeable is the camera quality. The difference in resolution and frame rate are impossible to ignore, although it's also possible that I'm using one or even both of those terms wrong. Either way, it's the first thing Jack comments on.
Everything looks like a Mexican soap opera.
What an oddly specific example to have at the ready. Despite the visual shift of the live multicam setup, the show is quick to employ one of its single camera signatures in the form of a cutaway, which is nothing short of delightful. Like, since Tina Fey obviously can't be in two places at once, when she sets up a flashback involving herself from the day before, Flashback Liz is played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, the first of several celebrity cameos sprinkled throughout the episode. The commitment to what works is admirable, but the drawback here is that by necessity, the cameras are less anchored than the standard SNL setup, which makes for some less than polished cinematography that gave me motion sickness more than once while watching this. This sacrifice in video quality is one of several compromises that will come to define Live Show as a whole, but I actually mean that respectfully. In order for a live episode of 30 Rock to function, the majority of their comedic and stylistic flares would have to remain present in some capacity while being scaled back enough to work in a live setting with no post-production. And I think it works more often than it doesn't here. There's also a fun B-plot with Tracy that revolves around the concept of actors breaking, or cracking up live on stage, which is ironic because Jimmy Fallon doesn't appear until the season 6 live episode. It turns out that despite being a notoriously unprofessional cast member on a live sketch show for the past 4 years, Tracy has just learned about breaking from an old Carol Burnett show rerun he'd seen the night before. He is now insistent on breaking during that night's live show and sabotaging, or in Tracy's eyes, saving, the show for what he now insists is funnier than the writing. Much like the A-plot with Liz's birthday, it's an homage to classic television that also functions as a self-contained story. The concept of Tracy wanting to break character might be considered thin for a standard B-plot, but since it takes place over half an hour, and during the live show specifically, the bit runs its course effectively without wearing out its welcome. This also means it doesn't really get to escalate much beyond its initial premise, but it's fun on its own, and Tracy Morgan really gets to sell it.
Uh-oh. I'm doing something called breaking. Snort, hee hee, giggle, giggle. The audience loves this.
As Tracy unveils his master plan, we're treated to the first of a few fun and practical live gags that really highlight what the show is still capable of. As Liz concedes to Tracy that yes, live audiences do love when things go wrong, a poster in his dressing room is knocked askew, seemingly of its own accord, before falling off the wall entirely at the end of the scene. I absolutely loved this joke because it's so simple that it wraps back around to being smart, and even made me curious as to how they accomplished the physical aspect. Was there someone on the other side of the wall? Or even in the wall? Who dat ninja indeed? In the very next scene, there's an even simpler sight gag with Lutz wearing an I'm with stupid t-shirt, and Kenneth's unbridled glee as he exclaims each potential stupid really sells the simple humor of it.
That guy's stupid! Now she's stupid! Now they are! Now I were! Anyway.
Right after this, We get one more sight gag courtesy of Jack, who has seemingly mastered both knitting and sleight of hand magic since the top of the show to keep himself distracted from drinking in solidarity with his pregnant girlfriend. This is a runner that I thought was fine, if a bit forgettable. It's not the most ambitious plot, and unlike Liz and Tracy's stories, it doesn't have a connection to television, nor is it significantly enhanced in real time. In fact, I think the idea would be more interesting with a longer time frame, as opposed to Jack sniffing paint by like minute 12. Yeah, the bulk of the material and its escalations here were okay, but I would consider it among the weaker parts of the episode overall. Like I said earlier, there are a few celebrity cameos that add to the excitement of the live broadcast. One thing that's interesting to note is that because 30 Rock already had a murderer's row of guest stars, everyone besides Julia Louis-Dreyfus is returning to an established role instead of this being stunt casting for the sake of stunt casting. Rachel Dratch returns for the first time since season 1 as cleaning lady Jadwiga. Chris Parnell's Dr. Spaceman gets some ad time for a new project.
These are the sweet sounds of Dr. Leo Spaceman's Love Storm, an ultra-strength audio rebonulator.
And the second ad break features the return of John Hamm as Liz's ex-boyfriend Drew. He's just as handsome and almost as handless as when we last saw him, appearing here to promote a successful hand transplant clinic. Finally, Matt Damon phones it in as Liz's pilot boyfriend Carol for 2 quick scenes, one of which includes a co-pilot named Kevin, played by Bill Hader. Come to think of it, I don't think Kevin was an established character prior to this, but I'm gonna look the other way, because it's always a treat to see Bill Hader on live TV, making the absolute most of his 2-line cameo.
You know, I've always loved you. Not now, Kevin. Copy that.
The ad breaks and call-ins are a smart and effective way to incorporate these particular characters, keeping the flow of the live show intact, while sharing the spotlight with a handful of particular misfits who wouldn't organically fit into a studio-centric story. That being said, I do wish that Carol could have been worked into the main plot somehow, since his job as a pilot was the show's usual explanation for why Matt Damon wasn't always present to film with the cast in New York. But here he was, filming with the cast in New York. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to have him here in any capacity, but I do think it's a bit of a missed opportunity. By the end of live show, Jack rallies the troops to throw something together for Liz's birthday, chaos ensues, and nobody learns anything. Classic 30 Rock. The show ends where it began, with Jack and Liz back in his office after the show, where she insists that he join her for a drink to celebrate the end of her 40th birthday. Jack happily obliges, and after his toast to the birthday girl, there's one more trick up their sleeve where everything looks normal again, and we learn that the harsh, live resolution is actually how Jack sees the world when he's sober. It's a fun capper to a fun episode that about matches the sum of its parts. Sure, there were certain limitations and a few technical issues that could have benefited from a bit more practice, but what live show lacks in fine-tuning, it more than makes up for in adaptability, and I would be far from the first to consider this experiment a success. It was a nice nod to a bygone era that boosted ratings, landed Beth McCarthy Miller an Emmy nomination for her live direction, and as I've alluded to a few times now, was even successful enough for another live show the following season. I first thought of making a video about this after re-watching live show for the first time in years recently, and wondering how season 6's live from Studio 6H compared to what I had just seen. Would any of my mild criticisms be addressed? What else were they capable of now that they already had a live show under their belt? Will I ever get consistent sound quality from this microphone? And as it turns out, I would have to dive a little bit deeper for an answer to any of these questions, because Live from Studio 6H is currently not available on any streaming platform. But that's a story for next time. Thank you for watching. If you're watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you feel so compelled. I'm very new to YouTube and I don't know what the algorithm means, but I know that it scares me and I would appreciate the support. Part 2 coming soon.